Welcome back to Vietnamese Case Files. In today's special compilation, we revisit haunting criminal case files where love and trust were replaced by betrayal and ruthless hatred. We begin with the case of Nguyen, who staged a fake shooting scenario to conceal the murder of his girlfriend inside a car. Next is the chilling coldness of Jonathan Nguyen, who calmly played video games while his girlfriend's body remained hidden in a closet for 2 days. The truth also surfaced through the final, fading words, "my wife," uttered by victim Nguyen in an attempt to expose the person closest to her. We will also examine the blind jealousy that led 18-year-old Rina Nguyen to fire a shot into her boyfriend's back. The pursuit of justice then takes us to Colombia with the brutal Tinder trap set for Paul Phong Nguyen, and finally to the heartbreaking 20-year mystery beneath the Ohio River involving Stephanie Van Nguyen and her children. Join Vietnamese Case Files as we peel back each layer of truth behind these shocking tragedies. And if you enjoy investigative true crime content and want to follow along with Vietnamese Case Files and upcoming cases, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss a single episode. Now, let's begin. On the morning of November 10th, 2022, as the city of Medellin was just waking up, a local resident unexpectedly discovered the body of a young man lying beside a roadside trash pile in the quiet Robledo neighborhood. The witness immediately reported the finding to the police. Authorities quickly arrived, sealed off the area, and began collecting evidence. Based on initial observations, the victim appeared to be in his late 20s and had features of Asian descent. The body showed no obvious signs of injury, no blood, and no visible abrasions, making the unfortunate man look as if he were simply sleeping. Notably, there was a faint mark on the victim's wrist, resembling the outline of a recently removed wristwatch, and ring marks on his fingers suggested that jewelry had also been taken. These were clear signs of robbery. Additionally, there were no vehicles nearby and no indications of a struggle or violence at the scene, leading investigators to suspect that the victim had been killed elsewhere and later transported to this location. From these initial clues, police suspected this was a robbery targeting tourists, following a familiar method, drugging the victim and stealing their belongings. But due to an unexpected turn of events, it resulted in death. However, at this stage, all theories were still speculative. To understand what truly happened, investigators needed to identify the victim and reconstruct what he went through in his final hours. Detectives immediately reviewed missing person reports and contacted hotels and guest houses near the area to check whether anyone had failed to return to their room overnight. At that moment, one officer remembered a report from the El Poblado tourist district about a foreign visitor who had not returned to his Airbnb the previous night. At the time, the friend traveling with him had called the host to ask them to check, and then continued contacting the police out of growing concern. Officers quickly reached back out to the person who made the report and learned that his name was Eduardo, and that the missing friend was Paul Phong Nguyen, 27 years old. Investigators urgently took fingerprints from the body, compared them with immigration entry records, and confirmed that the deceased victim was indeed Paul, a Vietnamese American citizen. His family, who live in Orange County, California, had also been informed about their son's disappearance through Eduardo. With the victim's identity confirmed, police could now focus on examining the people around him and reconstructing Paul's timeline on that fateful night in order to trace anyone connected to his tragedy. According to information provided by the family, Paul Phong Nguyen was born in 1995. He was a Vietnamese American who grew up in Orange County, California. He was about 1.75 meters tall, in good health, and had no notable medical history. Paul worked as a freelance logistics consultant and often used his free time to travel widely. His family described him as energetic, cheerful, and deeply caring. His younger sister, Amy Nguyen, tearfully shared that Paul was a brother she truly admired, always ready to help whenever she faced difficulties. Among friends, Paul was seen as the life of the party because wherever he went, laughter followed. He was especially passionate about traveling, and after each trip abroad, Paul would always return with countless memories and small gifts for his loved ones. Paul arrived in Medellin to travel on November 4th with Eduardo, planning to attend a concert and explore the city. This trip to Colombia was also the first time he had ever set foot in South America. Before leaving, Paul excitedly said he would be attending a concert by the singer Bad Bunny and would take the opportunity to learn about Medellin's culture with his close friend. He had no conflicts or debts, and he did not know anyone in Colombia aside from people he met along the way. That was why his sudden death in a foreign country felt even more baffling to his loved ones. At this point, Eduardo, Paul's friend, provided a valuable detail. On the evening of November 9th, Paul said he was going to meet a girl he had gotten to know through Tinder in the El Poblado area, and that he might be home late. After that date, he completely lost contact. Hearing Tinder and missing after a date, investigators immediately thought of a series of similar robberies that had been occurring in the area. Notably, before he disappeared, Paul posted a photo on Snapchat of the girl he met on the date. The image showed a young woman with brown hair and a slender build, wearing a white jacket and dark jeans, sitting and looking down at her phone. The police's first assessment was that the girl in the photo was very likely being used as bait in a criminal plan. The group's probable target was Paul's valuables, drugging him and then robbing him. However, either the dose was too strong or an unexpected situation occurred, causing him to die and turning a robbery into a homicide. This scenario matched the method that Colombian security authorities had previously warned tourists about. To find more clues, police focused on reconstructing the victim's final movements. From Eduardo's account and message data, they learned that Paul met the girl late on the evening of November 9th in the El Poblado area, widely regarded as Medellin's nightlife hub. The two went into a restaurant in the area. Investigators immediately pulled security camera footage from around the restaurant and discovered that between 1:45 a.m. and 2 a.m. on November 10th, a camera near the entrance recorded Paul leaving with a young brown-haired woman wearing a light-colored jacket closely resembling the person in the photo Paul had shared before he went missing. After that, the girl linked her arm through Paul's as they stepped out onto the street, and the two appeared quite close. One notable detail was that across the street, a suspicious gray car was already idling and waiting. Surveillance footage captured the girl leading Paul toward that vehicle, and then they disappeared into the night. This may have been the vehicle the criminal group used to transport Paul and carry out the crime. Police continued tracing the car's route through the city's traffic cameras. The gray car was last seen near the Robledo area in the early morning hours, matching the suspected time the perpetrators disposed of the body. This evidence therefore fit the hypothesis that after leaving the restaurant, Paul may have been drugged inside the car or at another location. The criminals then stole all of his belongings, and when they realized the victim had died, they drove his body to Robledo and dumped it. Meanwhile, preliminary forensic results showed that the victim's blood and stomach fluid samples contained a high level of clonazepam, a powerful sedative that can cause drowsiness and respiratory failure when overdosed. In addition, investigators also detected scopolamine, a so-called forced drugging substance, notorious in Colombia. When these two substances are combined, a victim can lose nearly all consciousness and become easy to control. The final forensic conclusion stated that Paul died from cardiopulmonary arrest caused by poisoning, leading to a lack of oxygen to the brain and rapid death. This information confirmed that Paul had been poisoned, not that he died naturally. As a result, the case was officially classified as a homicide and the investigation continued. A breakthrough lead emerged when the financial investigation team discovered suspicious transactions on Paul's credit card after he went missing. The victim's family reported that a series of unusual charges appeared on his card in the early morning hours of November 10th. Specifically, Paul's card was used at a 24-hour pharmacy and several convenience stores in Medellin between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. The total amount withdrawn and charged reached 35 million Colombian pesos, nearly draining his entire credit limit. Tracing the transactions, police went to a convenience store. The cashier there recalled serving two local young men who used a credit card to purchase several expensive items at around 4 a.m. Both spoke native Spanish and appeared to be in a hurry. Fortunately, the pharmacy's security camera had clearly captured the faces of the two men using Paul's card. With this valuable lead, police immediately compared the images with criminal records and identified one of them as Cesar Mendoza Lopez, 28 years old, a suspect with a prior record for petty theft in Medellin. The other man was younger, around 25, and his identity was still unknown. Facing a dangerous criminal group, Medellin police had to coordinate with the prosecutor's office to open a special investigation. They decided to release the image of the Tinder girl and the photos of the two suspects extracted from store surveillance footage, asking the public for help in identifying them. At the same time, investigators monitored social media accounts and phone numbers the victim had contacted while in Colombia. They located the suspicious girl's Tinder account from the victim's phone, and from that account, the team traced a login IP address in Medellin. Combined with a pharmacy camera lead, police narrowed in on a criminal cell operating out of an apartment complex in Medellin, where the suspected individuals frequently gathered. During the manhunt, Paul's friends and family did not remain passive. They decided to hire a private security firm along with a local attorney to conduct a parallel investigation. This proactive effort quickly created pressure, pushing authorities to accelerate the case. The private investigative team worked closely with police, sharing everything they gathered from Paul's social media data, GPS location information, and card transaction history, to mobilizing online communities to search for clues about the mysterious girl. Under pressure from both sides, by the end of March 2023, Medellin police had collected enough evidence to issue arrest warrants. Most importantly, they identified the Tinder girl as Evelyn Johanna Henao Herrera, 21 years old. The investigation also revealed that Evelyn was the girlfriend of Cesar Mendoza, the man seen in the pharmacy footage. The couple was also working with a third person, Brian Steven Taborda Herrera, 25 years old, forming a coordinated fraud and robbery group. Brian was the young man who accompanied Cesar when Paul's card was used at the pharmacy. All three were part of a criminal gang that specifically targeted foreigners and had successfully carried out multiple drugging and robbery cases in Medellin. On March 31st, 2023, in a coordinated operation, Colombian police carried out simultaneous raids and arrested Evelyn, Cesar, and Brian at different locations across the city. At the time of her arrest, Evelyn had dyed her hair a bright blonde to change her appearance, but she still could not evade law enforcement. And so, after nearly 5 months of following clue after clue, the suspects believed to be responsible for Paul Nguyen's tragedy were finally taken into custody, closing a grueling investigative phase and opening the next chapter in the fight to secure justice for the victim. The first suspect was Evelyn Johanna Henao Herrera, 21 years old, the girl who appeared on the date with Paul. Evelyn was born and raised in Medellin and came from an ordinary family. Despite her young age, she had already slipped onto a troubled path. The first suspect was Evelyn Johanna Henao Herrera, 21 years old, the girl who appeared on the date with Paul. Evelyn was born and raised in Medellin and came from an ordinary family. Despite her young age, she had already slipped onto a troubled path. According to investigative records, Evelyn was part of an at-risk youth circle, dropped out of school early, and had previously been suspected of involvement in several petty thefts, though she had never faced serious punishment. Evelyn's attractive appearance and smooth social skills were fully exploited by the group as a key tool for luring victims into their trap. Evelyn's role in the Paul Nguyen case was that of bait. She connected with the victim through Tinder, built trust, lured him in, and then directly slipped drugs into Paul's drink. Evelyn's motive was simple. She and her accomplices wanted to profit by stealing valuables and money from tourists like Paul. In this criminal group, the alleged mastermind was Cesar Augusto Mendoza Lopez, 28 years old, Evelyn's boyfriend. Cesar had a prior theft record and was also suspected of involvement in multiple other robberies targeting tourists in Medellin. He was described as cunning and streetwise. It was Cesar who came up with the plan to use Evelyn as bait to lure victims into their hands. Cesar also acted as the driver and the group's enforcer. He would drive nearby, monitor the date, and wait until Evelyn signaled that the victim had been drugged, then Cesar would take Paul away from the scene. Afterward, he would directly guard the victim or take part in disposing of the body. The final accomplice was Brian Steven Taborda Herrera, 25 years old, the third member who played a supporting role. He had a prior record, or at least a bad reputation locally, for theft-related behavior. Brian was the youngest in the group, less experienced, and likely recruited by Cesar. His role was to help Cesar withdraw cash and make purchases using the victim's card. In other words, he handled the collection of the loot. Brian was also willing to assist in restraining the victim if necessary. Overall, all three suspects were still quite young, yet they had already fallen into organized crime. They worked together as a small group that hunted tourists using sophisticated tactics, and Paul Nguyen tragically became a target, in part because he frequently visited nightlife areas, wore a valuable watch, and used a newer model smartphone. The gang decided to approach Paul through the Tinder dating app. Evelyn's profile quickly caught Paul's attention, and she proactively invited him to meet at a bar in the El Poblado area, where he was staying. On the evening of November 9th, Paul arrived at the bar and met Evelyn, who was already waiting. The two had a few drinks and talked in a relaxed atmosphere. As the night unfolded, Evelyn took advantage of a moment when Paul was not paying attention and mixed a prepared dose of poison into his drink. The substance was nearly colorless and odorless, making it difficult to detect, yet strong enough to make Paul feel dizzy and lose awareness. As the drug took effect, Evelyn gently suggested that they could go to her apartment to continue listening to music. In a state of impaired judgment, Paul agreed without realizing he was walking into a carefully staged trap. At around 2 a.m., on November 10th, Paul stumbled out of the bar with Evelyn supporting him. The car driven by Cesar Mendoza was already waiting outside. After Evelyn and Paul got into the car, Cesar and Brian Stephen Taborda began carrying out their plan. They restrained Paul, while Evelyn took advantage of his dazed condition to search his wallet and take his bank cards. The group then went on to shop and withdraw money using Paul's cards at several stores before returning to where they were staying. When they realized Paul had unfortunately died, they decided to dispose of the body. Cesar drove to the Robledo area, an isolated part of the city, in the early morning and left Paul's body beside a trash bin. The arrests of Evelyn Henao, Cesar Mendoza, and Brian Taborda were only the beginning of the legal process. According to a statement from the Medellin prosecutor's office, Evelyn and Cesar were charged with aggravated murder, organized robbery, and conspiracy to commit crimes for the purpose of unlawful gain. Brian Taborda, because he did not directly cause the victim's death, was charged only with offenses related to organized robbery and conspiracy. At the first hearing in early April 2023, all three pleaded not guilty. When questioned by the judge, they either chose silence or tried to deny their roles in the case. Evelyn's attorney even argued that she had merely been with the victim, not participated in any crime, and requested that she be released on bail. However, that request was denied. The judge determined that this was an especially serious and organized case, and therefore ordered all three defendants held in custody while awaiting further proceedings. The legal process then dragged on for more than 1 year, with active involvement from the victim's family. As the hearings continued, each defendant's attitude gradually became clear. At first, Evelyn Henao appeared confused, crying, and insisted that she had not meant to do it, saying only, "It was an accident." However, prosecutors immediately countered that bringing the drug and coordinating with accomplices showed her actions were intentional, aimed at robbery, and that the victim's death was an unavoidable consequence of that conduct. Cesar Mendoza, meanwhile, remained nearly silent throughout the proceedings, occasionally curling his lip into a cold smile. He made only one statement that benefited him, blaming Evelyn for having overdone it and used too strong a dose, implying that he never intended to kill. As for Brian Taborda, he appeared more remorseful, keeping his head down as he listened in court to the recounting of his own actions. Brian's attorney also asked the court to consider a reduced sentence, arguing that the defendant was young and committed the crime because he was influenced and pulled into it. However, prosecutors argued that this was an organized criminal group, that each person had a clearly defined role, and that no one was forced to participate. After months of completing legal procedures, the final trial took place in early 2024 in Medellin. Evelyn Henao and Cesar Mendoza were found to be direct accomplices in causing Paul Nguyen's death, on charges including intentional homicide, robbery involving violence, and criminal conspiracy. Each defendant was sentenced to 19 years and 7 months in prison, a punishment considered proportionate to the danger and severity of their actions. As for Brian Taborda, because his role was more limited, he received a lighter sentence. He was convicted only of organized robbery and was sentenced to around 5 years in prison. In addition to prison time, the court also ordered the defendants to pay compensation to the victim's family, including funeral expenses, the cost of repatriating the body, and damages for emotional suffering. When the verdict was read, the three defendants reacted very differently. Evelyn covered her face and sobbed uncontrollably. Cesar remained indifferent with his eyes lowered, while Brian mumbled thanks to the court for showing leniency toward him. Notably, Evelyn's attorney continued to state that they would appeal to seek a reduced sentence, but given the overwhelming evidence, the chances of success were considered very low. Paul Nguyen's family expressed satisfaction that justice had finally been served. The legal journey ended with a victory for what was right, even though nothing can truly compensate for the loss the victim's family had to endure. The murder of Paul Phong Nguyen in Colombia became a stark warning about the dangerous dark side of dating apps and the risks of trusting strangers while traveling abroad. The case drew major attention from international media, In the United States, many newspapers and television stations reported on the case, warning travelers about Tinder traps in Colombia, the US. Embassy in Bogota even issued a special security alert, urging citizens to exercise maximum caution when using dating apps in Colombia, emphasizing that multiple US. Citizens in Colombia have been drugged, robbed, and even killed after meeting with individuals on dating apps. In Vietnam, online communities were also shocked as they followed the story of a Vietnamese American who died overseas. Many domestic news outlets reposted developments in the case and reminded overseas Vietnamese to be extremely cautious when making connections online. Public opinion in Colombia was also furious that criminal gangs were damaging the country's image. As for law enforcement, Medellin authorities pledged to crack down hard on those who use honey trap tactics to prey on tourists, while also improving security in tourist areas. At around close to midnight on April 23, 2013, a series of deafening gunshots suddenly rang out along a deserted stretch of Old Gentilly Road in New Orleans. Just minutes later, a passerby named James Mushat, while going through the McCoy Street area, happened to spot a middle-aged man sprawled in a roadside drainage ditch, his clothes soaked through with blood. He immediately called the authorities to report what he had seen. However, by the time the New Orleans Police Department's Rapid Response Unit arrived at the scene, the man had already died. Based on initial observations, the victim was an Asian man in his 40s. His hands were tightly bound behind his back with plastic zip ties. A preliminary examination indicated he had been shot twice, once in the head and once in the chest, at very close range. At the scene, police collected several spent shell casings scattered around the body. In addition, investigators found tire marks, most likely left by a medium-sized truck. One notable detail from witness Mushat was that while waiting for paramedics, he had walked closer to check on the victim. At that moment, despite being in critical condition, the man still tried to speak and faintly managed to whisper two words, "My wife," before losing consciousness. That brief dying message immediately led investigators to suspect this was not a random attack, but something that may have stemmed from simmering conflict within the victim's own family. Not long after, using investigative methods, police identified the victim. He was Nguyen, a 44-year-old Vietnamese man. When officers went to the house at 4800 Sandalwood, where Nguyen lived, they met his wife, Charity Nguyen. At that time, she appeared anxious and said her husband had not come home for several days. Based on Nguyen's dying words and his existing suspicions, Detective Greg Hamilton quietly observed Charity's behavior closely. He was especially struck by the fact that there were spots in the house where security cameras had once been mounted, but were now empty. When asked, Charity explained that the camera system had been broken for a long time, so she had removed it. That explanation did not convince Hamilton because the dust patterns around the mounts suggested the devices had only been taken down recently. His professional instincts told him the wife was hiding something. Police immediately began pulling footage from security cameras around the neighborhood. Fortunately, a neighbor's camera captured unusual activity on the night of April 23rd. The surveillance video showed an unfamiliar Nissan Titan pickup truck backing into Nguyen's driveway. In the footage, a man stepped out of the cab and dragged something shaped like a human body, then loaded it into the truck bed. Soon after, the Nissan left the house and traveled in the same direction as the area where Nguyen's body was later found. The video also revealed a notable detail. Charity Nguyen's personal van appeared as well, repeatedly leaving and returning to the house multiple times that night. This completely contradicted Charity's earlier statement when she insisted she had been home from 10:30 that evening and had not gone anywhere. Clearly, the wife had not been truthful about her whereabouts that night. When investigators confronted her with the footage, she suddenly shifted from anxious to terrified, then quickly invented an entirely new story. Charity claimed that when she returned home that night, she saw her husband, who went straight into the bathroom. Shortly after, she heard him talking to someone, and when she peeked out, she saw a strange man holding Nguyen at gunpoint. The man shouted that she had to shut the door, or he would harm the whole family. Charity went on to say she also overheard multiple other male voices, implying the gunman had accomplices. Yet she could not describe the attacker's appearance and also refused to cooperate in creating a composite sketch. This story, full of holes, only made police more suspicious, and they gradually determined that the wife was the #1 suspect in the case. As the investigation risked stalling due to Charity's evasive statements, a major turning point came thanks to the cooperation of a witness. On May 27, 2013, more than a month after the case, Detective Hamilton met with a longtime acquaintance of Nguyen and Charity. That meeting revealed a shocking secret. Around early April 2013, Charity and a man named Hoi Quang Huang approached this person and offered to pay $10,000 to kill Nguyen. At first, thinking it was just a reckless outburst, this person refused. But not long after, Hoi, the man who had been with Charity, approached him privately a second time. This time, in addition to offering more money, Hoi brought a handgun and a pair of gloves to give him his tools for the killing. He repeatedly pressured the man to do it and promised an extra reward in illegal drugs afterward, but the man still refused to take part in a plot to end someone else's life. When he learned that Nguyen had indeed died on April 23rd, the witness decided to report everything to the police. His statement became the golden key to the case, because it not only confirmed suspicions about the wife, but also revealed the identity of a second suspect, Hoi Quang Huang, Charity Nguyen's accomplice, and also her lover. The next lead came from the suspicious Nissan Titan. From the video images, police could only make out the vehicle's shape and color, not the license plate, because it had been removed beforehand. Using that information, they searched records for Nissan Titan owners in the New Orleans area. After filtering dozens of silver gray Titans, one potential name surfaced: Irene Booker, a woman known for frequently lending out her vehicle in exchange for money or illegal drugs. Detective Hamilton immediately met with her to verify the details. Irene Booker stated that on the afternoon of April 23rd, Hoi Quang Huang came to borrow her truck and promised to return it that evening. Hoi was an acquaintance who had borrowed the vehicle a few times before, and this time he also implied he would pay either with cash or drugs. Notably, well past midnight, Hoi still had not returned the truck as promised, prompting Booker to call and pressure him. Hoi only reassured her that the group would bring it back soon, then quickly hung up. At around close to 1 o'clock in the morning, an unfamiliar man drove the Titan back to Booker and handed her $200 in cash as the rental fee. The next day, Booker discovered the truck's rear license plate was missing, forcing her to apply for a replacement temporary plate in late June 2013. This strongly suggested that Hoi Huang had borrowed the vehicle to dispose of evidence. He removed the plate to avoid identification, used the truck to transport the victim's body, and then had an underling return it along with some cash to keep Booker quiet. Based on this detail, police added an obstruction of justice allegation against Hoi Huang for removing the license plate to conceal the crime. On the other hand, they also theorized that the person who actually fired the shots that killed Nguyen might not have been Hoi or Charity, but one or more other hired killers brought in to carry out the job. After collecting all key evidence, including surveillance footage, witness statements, and related records, police officially arrested Charity Nguyen and Hoi Quang Huang. Both faced serious charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation to commit murder, second-degree murder, and obstruction of justice. In August 2013, Charity's sister posted $125,000 to secure Charity's release on bond while she awaited trial. However, when the New Orleans Superior Court issued the formal indictment in September 2013, both Charity and Hoi briefly disappeared. This forced authorities to raise the bail to extremely high amounts: $1.5 million USD for Charity and $1.65 million USD for Co. In addition, investigators also appealed to the public for more information about the hired hitmen, unidentified individuals who were believed to have directly fired the shots in the case. However, during this stage, no one was able to identify those unknown gunmen, leaving the question of who truly killed Nguyen still unresolved. According to the investigation, Charity Nguyen, then 35 years old, was born into a Vietnamese family, grew up in the United States, and lived in the New Orleans East area. Before the tragedy, Charity lived with Nguyen as husband and wife, even though they were not legally married. Together, they raised 3 young children, and no one could have imagined that behind her partner's back, the woman had begun an affair with Hoi Huang. That secret relationship became the root cause of the plot to take her partner's life. Charity's motive was determined to be a mix of financial ambition and distorted emotions. According to the police theory, if Nguyen died, she would receive the full insurance payout and other assets, and could also openly be with her lover. Even more chilling, Charity planned to hire someone else to carry out the killing so she would have an alibi. This coldness and ruthlessness led local public opinion to nickname her the Black Widow of New Orleans East, referring to the female spider known for attacking its mate. Even so, some people who knew her claimed Charity was not inherently heartless, and that she may have been led down that criminal path by her lover. Quay Quang Hoang, 35 years old, was Charity's lover and the main accomplice in this case. He was also a Vietnamese American living in New Orleans East, but his background was deeply street. He had been linked to multiple criminal activities in the past, including a prior record for conspiracy to commit murder and for disturbing the peace. With such a complicated past, Huy was believed to be a broker for illegal jobs and to have close ties to local criminal gangs. He was also involved in small-scale drug dealing, for example, using heroin as payment in exchange for borrowing Irene Booker's vehicle. In this case, Huy Wong was the one who arranged for the hitmen, prepared the means by borrowing a vehicle and removing the license plate, and personally directed the crew. He was not only present at the scene to restrain the victim, but also handled the cleanup afterward, such as getting rid of the security camera system and the murder weapon. The victim, Nguyen, may have known Coy, but he certainly could not have imagined that the man was secretly involved with Charity and was plotting to kill him. After the crime was carried out, Huy calmly met Charity the next morning and coldly told her that Nguyen had been taken care of. However, the man never expected that the victim would still manage to whisper final dying words to implicate his own wife, and that one of the people Huy had approached to recruit for the killing would quietly report everything to law enforcement. These unexpected details completely shattered what had seemed like Huy Quang Hoang's perfect plan. After more than 3 years of investigation, the murder of Lien Nguyen was officially brought to trial in late September 2016, drawing intense public attention in New Orleans because of its severity and highly controversial details. With multiple defendants involved, the court decided to sever the cases and try Charity Nguyen and Huy Quang Hoang in 2 separate trials to ensure fairness and to prevent the defendants from blaming one another in front of the jury. As Charity Nguyen's trial began, the defense strategy focused on sowing doubt about the prosecution's claims. Her attorneys argued that the victim's dying words were not necessarily an accusation, but could have simply been a desperate cry for help in his final moment. In addition, they emphasized that all evidence against Charity was circumstantial, with no physical evidence or direct testimony proving that she ordered her husband's killing. Building on that argument, the defense constructed an alternative narrative, claiming that Huy Hoang was the true mastermind. According to them, Huy acted out of personal conflict or financial disputes with Lien Nguyen, while his romantic relationship with Charity was merely something he exploited to gain easier access to the victim and carry out the attack. Throughout the proceedings, Charity Nguyen remained composed, sometimes breaking into tears when speaking about her late partner and their children. Prosecutors argued these were simply crocodile tears, while the defense tried to portray her as a fragile woman who had been completely manipulated by her lover. In court, Charity denied all allegations and continued to insist she was only the victim of an armed robbery and that she had no knowledge of any murder plot. She even placed all responsibility on Huy, claiming he acted alone out of personal grudges or a blind, possessive obsession. In the end, after deliberations, the jury found Charity Nguyen not guilty of second-degree murder. The verdict immediately shocked the public, leaving many outraged and convinced that justice had not been properly served. Even so, from a legal standpoint, it is likely the jury did not believe there was sufficient proof to convict Charity under the strict standards of criminal law. From that point on, Charity Nguyen was officially free. Huy Quang Hoang's trial followed soon after on a slate of serious charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation to commit murder, second-degree murder, and obstruction of justice. Although Charity had been acquitted, that did not change the prosecution of Huy. Unfortunately, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision on the murder and conspiracy to murder charges, resulting in a legal deadlock. At that point, the obstruction of justice charge alone, related to disposing of key evidence such as removing the license plate and dismantling the camera system, was supported by enough convincing evidence to convict Coy. Based on his prior record and being classified as a dangerous repeat offender, Huy Hoang initially received a very severe sentence, life in prison without parole under Louisiana's habitual offender law. However, after an appeal, the appellate court overturned that sentence, arguing that the evidence presented was still not direct enough. This unexpected turn left the public and the victim's family even more devastated. It was not until 2019 that the Louisiana Supreme Court reviewed the entire case and decided to reverse the appellate court's ruling. The justices held that although the evidence was circumstantial, when logically connected, it was still sufficient to conclude that Huy Hoang directed the removal of the license plate in order to conceal his criminal conduct. As a result, the obstruction of justice conviction was reinstated, meaning Huy Hoang had to continue serving a life sentence. In the end, the legal outcome of this case carried a sense of incompleteness. Charity Nguyen was found not guilty, while Huy Quang Hoang paid with the rest of his life in prison, based on an indirect charge. Even more troubling, the people who actually fired the shots that killed Nguyen have, to this day, never been identified or arrested. The case may have reached its final legal chapter, but it's still left behind intense debate about the limits of justice and the gaps within the criminal court system. It can be said that Nguyen's shocking murder drew sustained attention from the Vietnamese American community and New Orleans media for many years. The social impact was enormous, not only the pain endured by the victim's family and his 3 young children, but also a sobering warning about the dark side that can hide within relationships that seem ordinary on the surface. Many voices in the community still believe the legal system did not fully deliver justice when Charity was acquitted. However, others argue that if she truly escaped punishment, then having to live with guilt and torment for the rest of her life outside prison may be the harshest penalty of all. At the same time, the case still contains unresolved irregularities. For example, even now, the identity of the gunman who caused Nguyen's death remains a major question mark. Were they anonymous criminals hired by Co., or did he and Charity personally pull the trigger? For 2 consecutive days in early April 2009, Kimberly couldn't reach Kate, her housemate. She called Kate's phone, but no one answered. This was highly unusual, because Kate was very disciplined and wouldn't suddenly disappear without saying anything. Moreover, April 1 was rent day. Kate always paid her share right on schedule, but this time there was no sign of it. Sensing something was wrong. On the afternoon of the 2nd of April, 2009, Kimberly found Kate's mother's phone number and called to report that Kate had been missing for 2 days. Kate's family immediately drove to the apartment at around 7 o'clock in the evening. When they arrived, Kate's mother and Kimberly turned on the lights and searched through Kate's bedroom. The moment the closet door opened, Kimberly froze. She discovered her friend lying motionless inside. She panicked and ran out of the room, screaming for help as she fled. Kate's parents then rushed in, broke down in tears, and did their best to pull their daughter's body out of that cramped space. They realized Kate had been gone for some time, her body was cold and stiff, and decomposition had already begun. The heartbreaking scene caused both of them to collapse on the spot. Immediately afterward, Kimberly rushed to report the terrible news to the Long Beach Police Department. When the first investigator arrived at the scene, he was met with the sight of a middle-aged couple wailing as they clutched their child's body on the floor. And so, the frantic call from a roommate and the devastating image of the victim's family marked the beginning of one of the most haunting cases in the Long Beach student community. From the very first observations, police quickly determined that this was a homicide with multiple chilling signs. The victim was found wearing only a thin top that had been pulled down and bunched up to mid-chest, while the lower half of her body was completely unclothed. Most notably, there was a leather belt tightly wrapped around her neck multiple times, and Kate's mouth had been stuffed with a pair of black underwear later identified as belonging to the victim. Investigators also recorded a terrifying detail. Both of Kate's nostrils were packed with pain relief pills. Advil. These gruesome details indicated that someone had deliberately blocked every airway from the mouth to the nose and the neck, causing the victim to die from asphyxiation. The belt around her neck was later removed and examined. It was identified as a men's leather belt measuring 44 inches long, with multiple strands of the victim's hair stuck to it. In addition, Kate's head and neck showed severe injuries, with at least 3 clean, sharp wounds to the back of her head and neck. These wounds were not immediately fatal, but they would certainly have left the victim badly stunned before she was killed. However, the room carried a faint scent of soap and air freshener, highly unusual for a typical homicide scene. The bedroom window was wide open. Numerous scented dryer sheets were scattered on the closet floor and even on the victim's body. An essential oil diffuser plugged into an outlet was also continuously releasing fragrance throughout the room. These details immediately revealed a disturbing truth. The killer appeared to have gone to great lengths to erase traces and mask odors in order to delay discovery. This could only have happened if the murderer remained at the scene long enough after the killing to arrange everything. At the same time, the method of attack suggested this was most likely a calculated murder rooted in a close relationship, rather than a random assault. Based on that line of reasoning, police quickly began gathering Kate's personal information to narrow the investigation. Her family said that Kate Soo-yi, born in 1988, was the daughter of a Korean immigrant family living in California. At the age of 20, Kate was a nursing student at California State University, Long Beach, and was described as hardworking, devout, and highly principled. Kate's family trusted her deeply. In early 2009, they agreed to let her move out so it would be easier for her to study. Kate then moved into an apartment near campus and lived with Kimberly Ryman, a fellow student she had never met before. Living on her own, Kate always tried to be independent. She attended classes regularly and worked part-time diligently to support herself, paying her share of the rent to Kimberly on time every month. Because Kate was responsible and rarely disrupted her routine, when she was absent from home for even one day without explanation, Kimberly immediately sensed that something was wrong. In her personal life, Kate had a boyfriend named Jonathan Nguyen, her first love. They had started dating back in their high school years, and Kate had never loved anyone other than Jonathan. Meanwhile, Kimberly Ryman, Kate's roommate, recounted to police everything that had happened beforehand. She said that at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the 31st of March 2009, she saw Kate and Jonathan arguing fiercely. Kate angrily gathered Jonathan's belongings into piles and threw them toward the door, shouting at him to leave as she tossed them out. After that, Kate stood with her arms crossed, her eyes red with anger, staring at Jonathan. That was also the last time Kimberly saw her friend alive. Because the tension was so high, Kimberly decided to leave early to go work out, giving them privacy to deal with their personal issues. At around 6 o'clock in the evening, she saw a missed call from Kate's number. When she called back, Jonathan answered. Jonathan said they had argued again and that Kate had stormed off somewhere in anger, so he wanted Kimberly to help look for her. He also begged to stay and wait for Kate to return, claiming that he had Kate's phone and keys. Kimberly agreed to let Jonathan stay, but she also advised the young man that if Kate wanted him to leave, he shouldn't remain and make things even more tense. A little after 7 o'clock that evening, Kimberly returned to find the apartment dark. The lower lock was bolted, but the upper lock was not engaged. Jonathan had clearly left. The bags of his belongings that Kate had thrown out earlier were now gone as well. Kate's car, which was usually parked near the apartment, was also missing. And when Kimberly called Kate's number again, no one answered. Based on the roommate's statement, Jonathan Nguyen, the victim's boyfriend, quickly became a person of interest for police. Jonathan's information was circulated to law enforcement. A 20-year-old Vietnamese American man from Mission Viejo, Orange County, tall and slender, who often drove the victim's gray Toyota. A statewide search was issued. Kate's family also provided investigators with every lead they could remember. Jonathan often played video games and shopped at the Block at Orange, a major shopping center in Orange County. Detectives quickly considered tracking the victim's phone signal. Location data showed that Kate's phone was still active and was pinging in the area of the Block at Orange, not far from Long Beach. On the morning of the 3rd of April, 2009, a surveillance team was sent to the parking lot of the complex. They found Kate's Toyota parked there. For hours, police lay in wait and quietly monitored the vehicle. It wasn't until around 6 o'clock in the evening that a young man appeared, calmly walked up to the car, unlocked it with a key, and took a shirt from the trunk to change into. Realizing this was the suspect they were looking for, officers kept him under close watch. Meanwhile, Jonathan Nguyen casually changed his shirt in public and then went back into the mall, seemingly unaware that the net was tightening around him. Detectives followed Jonathan inside and saw him leisurely playing an arcade game in a game store. He even joked and laughed with other players as if nothing had happened. At around 8 o'clock in the evening, Detective Daniel Mendoza and his colleague decided to approach Jonathan. Dressed in plain clothes, they identified themselves as police and asked Jonathan to come to the station to speak with them regarding the disappearance of Kate Soo-yi. Jonathan did not resist and appeared quite calm. To avoid drawing attention in a public place, the detectives brought him to a surveillance vehicle parked nearby for a quick interview. Once inside the vehicle, Jonathan initially played dumb, claiming he didn't know where Kate was, that they had broken up, and that wherever she went, I don't care. However, the way he answered only raised more suspicion. Jonathan then turned the tables and asked police irrelevant questions, such as whether they had taken fingerprints yet or how they had tracked Kate's phone, as if he were probing how much investigators actually knew. After a few minutes of evasive back and forth, detectives transported Jonathan to the Long Beach Police Department for a more thorough interrogation. In the interview room, Jonathan initially continued to evade and deny responsibility. However, when confronted with the evidence, police presented that they had found Kate's body along with clear signs of a homicide. Jonathan began changing his story. He admitted he had been at the apartment on March 31, but still denied harming Kate. He claimed the two of them had sex that day and then argued about money. After that, Kate allegedly stormed out, while he stayed behind to clean up his things. He also said Kate liked rough sex and admitted they had experimented with using a belt during intimacy, but insisted that the last time I saw her, we didn't use any belt at all. But if Kate had truly left on her own, why were all her essential items like her phone and her car in Jonathan's possession? And if it really had been rough sex, why did the scene show only signs of cleaning and concealment? In the end, after hours of psychological sparring, faced with the investigators' sharp reasoning, Jonathan was forced to admit part of the truth. With his head lowered, he acknowledged that Kate had died right there in the bedroom that afternoon, yet he still tried to claim it was an accident. According to his final version, when Kate demanded a breakup, the two got into a physical struggle. He threw a single punch, and his girlfriend fell to the floor, went into convulsions, and died. Panicking when Kate became unresponsive, Jonathan claimed he tried to perform CPR, but it didn't work. Overwhelmed, he said he then put her body into the closet and fled. This self-serving story clearly conflicted with the heartbreaking scene police had witnessed. Even so, Jonathan's admission was enough for police to arrest him for Kate's killing. That night, Jonathan Nguyen was booked into the county jail, with bail set as high as $1 million USD, awaiting his day in court to face justice. According to the investigative file, Jonathan Alexander Nguyen, 20 years old at the time of the crime, was a Vietnamese American man born and raised in Orange County, California. He met Kate Soo-yi in high school. The two later dated and became each other's first love. However, people around them described the relationship as unhealthy. Kate's friends said Jonathan was so obsessed it was frightening. They had advised Kate to leave him after noticing that Jonathan was controlling, irrationally jealous, and repeatedly behaved unpredictably. In reality, their relationship had also been turbulent. They broke up once after graduating from high school in 2006, then got back together about a year later. Since getting back together, Jonathan practically clung to Kate nonstop. He often stayed overnight at Kate's apartment 4 to 5 days a week, turning his girlfriend's room into his private home. Her roommate said Jonathan was deeply unsettling. He seemed awkward, moody, and at times looked at her with a deranged stare that made her skin crawl. Once, a neighbor who didn't even know Jonathan happened to chat with him and was shocked by the frenzied anger Jonathan displayed when talking about Kate. He bitterly complained that she doesn't invest in the relationship like I do, she's always demanding money. That detail suggests Jonathan had already been harboring resentment and jealousy toward his own girlfriend. Jonathan Nguyen's family is barely mentioned in the file, but from a few details, it appears he came from an ordinary background and had no criminal record. In 2005, Jonathan graduated from Trabuco Hills High School, Mission Viejo. After that, it is unclear whether he continued his education. During the period after they reconciled from late 2007 to 2009, Jonathan did not appear to have any notable job or achievements. His biggest concern seemed to be controlling his girlfriend. He spent a lot of time on Facebook and playing video games, and his personality could seem somewhat childish. However, beneath that was a dangerous mindset. Jonathan viewed Kate as his personal property. According to the prosecutor's later account, from the earliest days of dating, Jonathan told himself that if I can't have her, I won't let anyone else have her either. That sick possessiveness quietly grew over time. Kate's friends had seen her upset after repeated, baseless, jealousy-fueled arguments when Jonathan would suspect Kate of seeing someone else or lash out when she didn't comply with his demands. Kate was gentle by nature and tolerated a lot, but eventually she realized the relationship was becoming toxic. In early 2009, Kate began distancing herself from Jonathan. She focused on school, went to church more often, and found joy with new friends. That likely only made Jonathan more afraid of losing her. By around March 2009, Kate signaled that she wanted to end the relationship. For someone as controlling as Jonathan, this was a major threat. Instead of accepting it, he saw a breakup as an unforgivable betrayal. In Jonathan's twisted mind, Kate owed him loyalty, and if she dared to leave, he would rather destroy her than let her belong to someone else. In short, Jonathan Nguyen's motive stemmed from blind jealousy and a selfishness that had become pathological. He showed no signs of remorse after the crime. On the contrary, his actions afterward revealed a frightening coldness. Jonathan was clear-headed enough to plan how to conceal his guilt, and he went about his life eating, socializing, and having fun as if nothing had happened. The killer's mindset at that point can be summed up in 2 words: cold-blooded. Over an investigation that lasted more than a year, spanning from 2009 into 2010, police and prosecutors reconstructed the case in substantial detail based on forensic evidence and witness statements. The autopsy results concluded that Kate Soo-yi died from asphyxiation. The mechanism of death was clear. The underwear stuffed tightly into her mouth forced her tongue backward to obstruct the airway, while the belt impeded the arteries in her neck, leading to severe oxygen deprivation, asphyxia. The extensive subcutaneous hemorrhaging and the dense petechiae across Kate's face and eyes showed that she had been forcefully restrained for a prolonged period. The 3 knife wounds to the back of her head and the nape of her neck, each about 1.3 centimeters deep, were determined to have caused bleeding but were not fatal. In addition, the victim's body had multiple bruises and abrasions, likely from her violently struggling to resist. Notably, Kate's tongue had bite marks at the tip, indicating that in the oxygen-deprived struggle before death, she had bitten down on her own tongue. These findings were completely inconsistent with Jonathan's "I lost control" story. On the contrary, they confirmed that Kate was attacked to the very end with the intent to take her life. Every action was deliberate. As for the perpetrator, after the killing, he took steps to prepare for covering up the crime. Jonathan remained at the scene for quite some time after Kate died. He rummaged through the apartment, gathered items that could incriminate him, such as clothing and blood-stained belongings, then threw the window wide open and used whatever he could to mask the odor of death, from scented dryer sheets to air freshener. He even stuffed pain relief pills into the victim's nostrils, seemingly to reduce odor and absorb fluid. He also cleaned the scene, but likely wasn't composed enough to erase everything. As a result, police were still able to recover DNA samples and strands of hair on the belt inside the room. Jonathan then placed Kate in the closet, an act of desperation to hide her body. That single act delayed discovery by 48 hours, buying him time to mislead everyone. When he left the apartment, Jonathan took the victim's phone, keys, wallet, and even her car to stage the appearance that Kate had stormed out and run away. The call he made at 6 o'clock in the evening on March 31 from Kate's phone to Kimberly was also meant to reinforce that narrative. However, no matter how calculated he was, the killer couldn't control the instincts of people who cared about Kate. Kimberly's vigilance, combined with the fact that Kate didn't pay rent on time on April 1, meant the disappearance was reported to the family sooner than Jonathan had expected. And so his plan collapsed when Kate's parents came to check the room and discovered their daughter's body. Jonathan Nguyen's trial took place in September 2010 at the Los Angeles Superior Court, Long Beach Courthouse. The case drew widespread attention from local residents. In court, prosecutor Leslie Klein described the defendant, Jonathan Nguyen, as a violently jealous, controlling boyfriend who had been harboring an intention to kill his girlfriend. She cited a chilling statement Jonathan had allegedly made. "If she leaves me, I'll deal with her," a terrifying declaration suggesting premeditation from early on. Jonathan's defense attorneys tried to paint a different picture. They acknowledged that Kate Soo-yi died while she was with Jonathan, but argued it was a tragic accident, not intentional. Their main strategy was to claim that Kate died from suffocation during consensual sexual activity between the two of them. Jonathan Nguyen even took the stand to defend himself, an unusual decision, likely because he believed he could persuade the jury with his personal story. However, the prosecutor pointed out that Jonathan had changed his story 3 times, first claiming he knew nothing, then saying Kate had left, and finally calling it an accident during sex. This inconsistency made the jury question his credibility. Moreover, forensic evidence rejected the sex accident theory. The examination report indicated that Kate and Jonathan had stopped having sex before she was killed, and that there were signs of a genuine physical struggle. The defendant's demeanor in court also enraged many people. A reporter for the Press-Telegram noted that Jonathan Nguyen wore a baffling smirk and seemed entertained throughout the trial. He even laughed out loud while answering questions on the witness stand. Even when the verdict was read, Jonathan kept smiling, bringing the victim's family to tears of indignation. Prosecutor Klein remarked bitterly, "I did see a few tears from him, but it seems those tears were mostly because he was sad that he got caught." In the end, after about 2 weeks of proceedings, the case concluded quickly. The evidence was so compelling that the jury deliberated for just over an hour before returning its final decision. Jonathan Nguyen was guilty of first-degree murder. His defense was unanimously rejected. On September 15, 2010, the court found Jonathan Nguyen guilty, with an aggravating factor that he used a dangerous weapon, the belt. On October 20, 2010, Judge Thompson T. Ung sentenced the defendant to life in prison with eligibility for parole only after at least 26 years. On the civil side, the court ordered Jonathan to pay $15,319.14 to the victim's family to cover funeral expenses, as well as $7,500 to the California Victim Compensation Fund. When the sentence was announced, Kate Soo-yee's parents quietly held their daughter's memorial photo and wept. They had obtained a measure of justice, but nothing could ever make up for their loss. After the trial, some jurors and spectators stayed behind to offer condolences to the family. They shared that the image of the lovely Kate Soo-yee in her graduation photo displayed in court had kept them awake at night. In contrast, as the defendant Jonathan Nguyen was escorted out of the courthouse, he remained cold and detached. Some even saw him curl his lips into a smirk, a moment that sparked outrage in the local press. For such a brutal crime, public opinion largely agreed that a life sentence was appropriate. California law allows some prisoners serving life terms to be considered for parole after a certain number of years. But many believed that with Jonathan Nguyen's attitude and personality, his release was likely a distant prospect. This case shocked the student community in California. Everyone was stunned that a gentle young woman like Kate could be brutally murdered by her own boyfriend so close to campus. California State University, Long Beach later worked with partners to organize workshops on dating, safety, and how to recognize warning signs of an abusive partner. Experts emphasize that controlling behavior and excessive jealousy should be treated as alarm signals in a relationship. If friends and family notice someone being psychologically manipulated or threatened by their partner, they should urge and support the victim in seeking help, possibly through the school or law enforcement, to prevent tragedies like the one that happened to Kate Soo-yee. At around 5:45 in the afternoon on February 12, 2020, 911 dispatch in Wichita, Kansas received an emergency report of a shooting in the 1500 block of South Baton Street. Officers were immediately dispatched to the address to check the situation. The scene was a small apartment near the intersection of Harry and Oliver in southeast Wichita. The first investigators on site described it as something straight out of a horror movie. Large pools of blood in front of the door, handgun shell casings scattered across the ground, and the front door wide open with shattered glass everywhere. There, they found a young man collapsed near the entrance with multiple gunshot wounds. The victim was still barely alive when emergency responders arrived, but due to the severity of his injuries, he died at the hospital less than an hour later. An initial examination determined that the victim died from a fatal wound to his back. According to preliminary findings from authorities, it was highly likely the shooter fired at the exact moment the victim turned his back to leave, a clear sign that this was a targeted attack. Notably, the glass door of a neighboring apartment was also shattered by a stray bullet at the exact moment a couple next door was bathing their 2 young children. Fortunately, no one else was injured, but the incident left residents in the neighborhood extremely shaken. The only witness at the scene was a 17-year-old girl who had been with the victim. Although she was still in shock, she provided crucial information. The victim was identified as Amare Holt, 22 years old, and the shooter was Rina Nguyen, 18 years old, Amare's girlfriend. According to the witness, after shooting her boyfriend, Rina panicked and drove away from the scene. That information was immediately broadcast to all police units in the area. An urgent manhunt was launched in case Rina tried to flee. However, only about 20 minutes later, the suspect unexpectedly drove back to the apartment. Police immediately moved in and ordered her to surrender. Rina did not resist when she was handcuffed, as if she understood it was already too late. The investigators' first impression of Rina Nguyen was a young woman with a small frame and a dazed expression, seemingly unable to believe the horrific thing she had just done. According to the investigation, the victim, Amare Diaz Holt, 22 years old, was an African-American man born and raised in Wichita, Kansas. After graduating from a local high school, he went to work for Spirit Aerosystems, a major aerospace parts manufacturer headquartered in Wichita. To his family, Amare was a loving, outgoing son. He often made time to visit his grandparents and was very close to his parents and his 5 siblings. Amare also had a natural gift for music and always dreamed of becoming an artist, a talent his family said he inherited from their tradition. In an interview with a local TV station, Amare's sister described him as smart, well-spoken, and always full of ambition for an artistic career. In his personal life, Amare began dating Rina Nguyen around 2019, when he was 22 and she had only just turned 17 or 18. Although their relationship was affectionate at first, over time, signs of strain began to appear between them. In December 2019, only about 2 months before the shooting, police had already been called to intervene in a domestic violence incident involving Amare and Rina. Although specific details were not made public, Amare's family acknowledged that the couple frequently clashed and that there had even been abusive behavior. Even so, the family said they never imagined those conflicts would escalate to the point of murder. Immediately after arresting Rina Nguyen, Wichita police began investigating the case. First, they needed to determine whether this was a heat-of-the-moment act or something planned in advance, and to assess whether any other factors were involved, such as self-defense or a third person. The authorities' initial assessment, based on the scene, was fairly clear. This was a homicide rooted in a personal relationship conflict, not a random attack. The fact that the victim was shot in the back while walking away indicated that Rina fired in anger and that the victim was not threatening her life at that moment. In addition, the suspect's decision not to stay on the run for long and to return quickly to surrender also suggested an impulsive act and belated remorse. However, to get the clearest and most complete picture, police still needed more forensic evidence and detailed statements from everyone involved. During the search, the murder weapon was found inside Rina's car. She had taken the gun with her when she fled, but then decided to come back and turn herself in, leaving the weapon on the seat. Later comparisons confirmed that the fingerprints on the gun's grip and trigger matched Rina Nguyen. Moreover, a detailed forensic examination showed that Amare Holt was hit by 3 bullets, all entering from behind. The shots damaged his lungs and aorta, causing him to die quickly. The firing distance was determined to be relatively close, indicating that Rina pointed the gun directly at her boyfriend in the tight space of the entryway. Those uncontrolled shots even traveled into a neighbor's home, highlighting just how reckless and dangerous the shooting was. Alongside the physical evidence, the statement from the 17-year-old witness who was with the victim became a key turning point in the investigation. At the police station, she recounted the events in detail. That afternoon, Amare asked her to come with him to Rina's place because he planned to have a frank conversation with his girlfriend. According to the witness, Amare appeared to want to end the relationship because the two of them had been arguing frequently. The girl came along simply as a friend, to support Amare emotionally, or at least to act as a mediator. However, the presence of another girl unintentionally triggered Rina's jealousy. The argument began when Rina demanded to know why Amare had brought someone else. Amare replied that the girl was only there to accompany him, but at the same time, he admitted that he wanted to break up. That admission hit Rina hard. The witness said Rina first froze, then shifted into desperation and rage. She kept crying and loudly accusing Amare of betrayal, while Amare also lost his temper, escalating into an extremely heated confrontation. After that, Amare was said to have stood up and headed for the door. In that exact moment, Rina suddenly pulled out a gun she had kept inside a nearby handbag. In front of the friend's stunned eyes, Rina aimed at Amare's back and fired repeatedly. The 17-year-old witness stated that everything happened in just a few seconds, too fast for her to react or stop it. According to police findings, these statements fully match the evidence collected, clarifying that the motive was a relationship conflict. It was Rina's jealousy and fear of being abandoned that drove her to lose control, leading to a heartbreaking outcome. During questioning, Rina Nguyen also admitted she shot her boyfriend in the heat of anger, then fled in panic. She said she drove aimlessly for a few miles before calming down and realizing she had committed a horrific crime. In the end, Rina decided to return to the scene, thinking that, "I can't run forever anyway." The suspect's belated account, together with all the evidence, completed the investigative picture, confirming that Rina Nguyen was the sole shooter who killed her boyfriend, Amare Holt, in a desperate, jealous frenzy. That same evening, Rina Nguyen was jailed on a charge of first-degree murder, the highest-level intentional homicide charge, along with a charge of firing a weapon into an occupied dwelling. The court initially set bail at $300,000, an amount so high that Rina had to remain in custody while awaiting trial. For more than 2 years afterward, due to the impact of the pandemic and complicated legal procedures, the case was repeatedly delayed before it was finally set for trial. During this period, Rina Nguyen's attorneys and prosecutors began negotiating plea agreements. Proactively admitting guilt and emphasizing that the motive was impulsive could help the defendant gain some sympathy from a jury and avoid an unnecessarily long trial. For Rina, the stakes were enormous. If convicted of first-degree murder, she could face a sentence as severe as life in prison without the possibility of early release. In the end, after many sessions, both sides reached an agreement that Rina would plead guilty to second-degree murder, causing a death without premeditation. This meant the prosecution would drop the first-degree murder charge against her. Rina officially accepted the plea deal in late March 2022. In addition, prosecutors requested an enhancement for the use of a dangerous weapon, meaning Rina would later be subject to certain special supervision conditions. Rina Nguyen was born around 2001 in Kansas to a Vietnamese family. According to court and police records, she was also sometimes listed under the surname Nguyen, possibly due to a transliteration issue or because she used her stepfather's surname, so English-language media occasionally referred to her as Rina Nguyen. Before this case, Rina had never been involved in any serious incident and had no criminal record. Friends her age described her as outgoing, though somewhat impulsive in relationships, but no one could have imagined she had such a violent side. However, Rina's temper had surfaced in an incident in December 2019. At that time, she was named in a report involving domestic violence connected to the victim himself, Amare Holt. Although the specific details were not publicly disclosed, it showed that the relationship between Rina and her boyfriend already had a history of extremely serious conflict. Ultimately, the motive behind Rina shooting her boyfriend that night was a collision of jealousy, fear, and extreme anger. Amare, bringing another girl to see Rina, although the girl was only a friend, became the final breaking point, because Rina believed her boyfriend had changed his heart. The moment she heard Amare propose a breakup, Rina entered an intensely agitated state, and all the long-suppressed hurt, sadness, and resentment suddenly exploded beyond control. Rina later admitted that when she pulled the trigger, she could no longer think clearly. She only felt her heart tighten with pain as her vision went dark. Psychology experts believe that Rina may have suffered from abandonment anxiety, which can lead to reckless behavior when someone feels they are about to lose the person they love. Even without premeditation, pulling out a gun and firing repeatedly at her boyfriend as he turned his back to leave was still considered exceptionally cruel. After the investigation and legal negotiations, the case was brought before the Sedgwick County District Court. However, because Rina Nguyen accepted a plea agreement, the proceeding did not feature the usual dramatic courtroom battles, but mainly served for the judge to review the deal and issue a sentence based on the terms already reached. According to the charging documents presented in court, Rina fired multiple shots into Amare Holt's back as he was leaving her home on February 12, 2020. Prosecutors emphasized that it was extremely dangerous and reckless, but they also agreed that the defendant had not planned it in advance and acted while in a highly agitated psychological state. Meanwhile, the defense attorney briefly presented Rina's background, pointing to her young age, lack of a prior record, and the volatile nature of her relationship with the victim, asking the court to consider these as mitigating factors. The official sentencing took place on June 10, 2022, presided over by Judge David Dahl. That day, the courtroom was packed with family members from both sides. Amare Holt's family attended in full force, including his parents and siblings. They brought his memorial photo and sat quietly, listening to every word of the sentence. On the other side, Rina's parents and several relatives were also present, their faces visibly stunned by the tragedy their daughter had caused. When given the opportunity for final remarks, Rina Nguyen stood up and tearfully expressed belated remorse. Turning toward the victim's family, she apologized through tears, speaking with apparent sincerity. The courtroom fell silent for several minutes, with only restrained sobbing from relatives on both sides. After carefully weighing the circumstances, Judge Dahl issued the ruling exactly as both sides had agreed: a sentence of 123 months in prison, equivalent to 10 years and 3 months, for Rina Nguyen. This sentence fell within the guideline range for second-degree murder in Kansas and was clearly far lighter than the mandatory life sentence that could have applied under a first-degree murder conviction. Explaining the decision, the judge said that although the defendant committed a serious crime by taking another person's life, the court considered the fact that she was young and acted while in a highly agitated mental state, and therefore accepted the sentence set out in the plea agreement. In addition to prison time, Rina would be placed on supervision for 36 months after release, 3 years of post-release monitoring, and was also ordered to pay approximately $9,000 in restitution to cover the victim's funeral expenses. As the judge read the sentence, Rina broke down in sobs, while Amer's family sat in silence because for them, 10 years in prison still may not have matched the loss of a son and brother they would never get back. Even so, they accepted the ruling, knowing that no sentence, no matter how long, could bring Amare back. Another notable legal detail is that under Kansas law, because Rina caused a death with a firearm, she is required to register as a violent offender after completing her sentence. This means that for 15 years from the date of her release, Rina Nguyen must report her address and personal information to local police, and that information will appear in a violent offender database that the public can search. The purpose of this requirement is to warn the community about the presence of individuals who have committed serious crimes. Rina's attorneys appealed in an effort to exempt her from this registration requirement, arguing that it violated her rights after she had served her prison term. They claimed the violent offender registration law infringed on free speech and equal protection because it applies only to certain categories of offenses. However, in February 2024, the Kansas Court of Appeals officially denied the appeal and upheld the requirement that Rina must register after release. This meant that even after paying the price of 10 years in prison, Rina Nguyen would still carry the label of a violent offender on her record for a long time. The plea agreement allowed the case to reach a relatively swift conclusion. Amer Holt's family expressed relief that the person responsible was held accountable under the law, even though the pain of losing their loved one would never truly fade. Notably, the victim's family also said they were willing to forgive Rina and hope she could change her life in the future, because they believed resentment only makes everything worse. The Rina Nguyen case left behind many painful lessons and sent shockwaves not only through Wichita, but also throughout the Vietnamese community in the United States. In local media, as well as news outlets in Vietnam, the story of an 18-year-old Vietnamese girl who shot and killed her boyfriend appeared repeatedly, drawing enormous public attention. The public could not hide their shock at how a youthful relationship conflict could end in such a tragic outcome. The media also spent significant time analyzing the deeper causes of the case, focusing on violence in romantic relationships and the reality that young people in the United States can access firearms so easily. Some outlets even raised questions about whether cultural differences or a lack of emotional control skills could have contributed to this tragedy. The lesson here is clear. Any signs of violence in a relationship, even the smallest, must be taken seriously and addressed promptly through counseling, legal support, or even law enforcement intervention such as restraining orders to prevent devastating tragedies. This case also sounded an alarm about the danger of firearms in the home. In the United States, gun ownership is fairly common, but Rina Nguyen's case showed that when anger flares, a gun in hand can turn a moment of rage into the act of taking a life. Even more horrifying is that those shots not only ended Amare Holt's life, but also nearly harmed an innocent neighboring family. At nearly midnight on April 17, 2024, doctors at Inova Mount Vernon Hospital in Hybla Valley, Virginia, suddenly received a critical emergency case. The patient was Allison Kate Laporta, 38 years old, who was carried into the emergency room by her boyfriend, Huy Tien, Max Nguyen, 47 years old, in critical condition with a gunshot wound through her chest. Shocked and agitated, the man told medical staff that his girlfriend had just been shot. According to Huy Nguyen's initial account, the two of them were in a parking lot in Annandale when a bullet came from somewhere and struck Allison. The story of a random gunshot immediately raised concerns that there might be an active shooter near the hospital area. Fairfax police were urgently called to respond to the incident. Shortly afterward, the hospital was briefly placed on lockdown, with entrances sealed and no one allowed to enter or exit except emergency personnel. While doctors and nurses raced against time to save Allison's life, Nguyen stood outside, appearing extremely anxious and distressed. He repeatedly urged the doctors to save his girlfriend. However, when police requested his cooperation, he avoided answering detailed questions about what had happened. Additionally, officers astutely noticed that although Hui claimed Allison was shot in a parking lot in Annandale, there was no blood spatter on him, nor any signs of a struggle. He was also unable to explain why he did not call 911 at the scene. This raised troubling doubts among investigators. Suspicion grew stronger and stronger when Jessica Harris, one of Allison's closest friends, heard the terrible news and rushed to the hospital immediately. Seeing Allison lying there with a fatal wound, Jessica was both shocked and devastated. She promptly reported to the police her suspicions about Nguyen, the victim's boyfriend. And those suspicions were not without basis. Just a few dozen minutes earlier, Jessica had received desperate pleas for help from Allison. The fragmented, panic-filled messages suggested that Allison was afraid of the very man she was with. This was something Hai never mentioned to the police. Immediately, Nguyen became suspect number one in the investigators' eyes. However, the police still needed much more direct evidence. They asked Hui to take them to the place where the incident had happened. At once, Hui became awkward and hesitant. And when officers opened the door of Hui's SUV, the light immediately revealed handgun shell casings scattered across the vehicle's floor mat. In total, 4 shell casings were found on the floor near the driver's seat, and 1 casing was found on the rear seat. This detail instantly raised a major question. If Allison had been shot by a stranger from outside the vehicle, then how could the casings ejected from the gun during firing have ended up concentrated inside the car like that? This clue led police to suspect that the shot must have been fired from inside the SUV, not from a distance outside as Hai had claimed. Meanwhile, the hospital reported that Allison's condition was extremely critical. She was transferred to Innova Fairfax Hospital, a larger surgical center, shortly after being stabilized with initial emergency treatment at Mount Vernon. Sadly, despite the doctor's best efforts, Allison Laporta did not survive and took her final breath not long after arriving at Fairfax. The victim's death meant that police now had to investigate a homicide rather than a non-fatal shooting. Allison's body was sent to the medical examiner for an autopsy, while the primary scene of interest shifted to Huy Nguyen's vehicle and the area around where he lived in Lorton. That very night, police conducted a thorough examination of the SUV. In addition to the shell casings, they discovered a bullet lodged in the rear seat area, most likely the same projectile that had passed through Allison's body. This detail further reinforced the theory that the victim was shot while seated inside the vehicle, and that this SUV was the true primary crime scene. In addition, technicians used ultraviolet light and chemical reagents to test for blood evidence. The results showed blood and tissue inside the car consistent with Allison's position in the front passenger seat. At the Annandale parking lot that Huy had mentioned, police found no sign of any shooting, no blood, no shell casings, and no witnesses who heard gunshots at the time Huy claimed. Everything pointed to the conclusion that the story of Allison being shot by a stranger had no basis. In the early morning hours of April 18th, 2024, Nguyen was taken to the station for further questioning. There, he continued to insist that while they were talking, they heard a gunshot and Allison collapsed, and that, according to him, someone must have fired randomly from far away and accidentally hit his girlfriend. He also repeatedly appeared grief-stricken over the loss of his girlfriend, while using the excuse that he was still in shock to refuse to answer questions. But what Huy did not expect was that the initial evidence collected had already begun to contradict his statement. When investigators pointed out that the shell casings inside the vehicle indicated the gun had been fired from within, Huy became flustered and suddenly offered a different story. He claimed that Allison had taken her own life. According to Hai, the two had argued earlier, and in anger, Allison grabbed the gun he was carrying and shot herself inside the car. This statement was completely inconsistent with his earlier story about a shot coming from far away, suggesting that Hai was trying to adjust his account to fit the evidence. But the abrupt change only made investigators more alert, because it clearly showed that Huy Nguyen was attempting to lie to conceal the truth. Meanwhile, other investigative leads were pursued urgently. One team of detectives was sent to the area around Huy's home in Lorton. With the help of a police K-9, they found a handgun discarded along the roadside near his house. The firearm's type and caliber matched the bullet found in the vehicle and the victim's wound. Hoey, secretly disposing of the gun near his home, was evidence that he was deliberately trying to get rid of the weapon, behavior more consistent with a perpetrator's mindset than that of an innocent witness. When investigators informed him that the gun had been recovered, they pressed him with rapid questions. If Allison had chosen to end her own life, why wasn't the gun in her hand or inside the car, but instead near his house? At that point, Hoey could only remain silent, head lowered. Even though he still did not confess, by then the truth of what happened was becoming increasingly clear to investigators. They believed that Nguyen was the one who shot and killed Allison Laporta, then pretended to rush her to the emergency room in an effort to create an alibi. Even so, determining the motive and the exact sequence of events remained crucial to securing a solid case against the killer. Investigators began interviewing the victim's family and friends to understand the relationship between Allison and Hoey. It was at this point that Allison's final messages became a valuable clue, revealing a chilling truth. Jessica Harris, Allison's close cousin, provided police with screenshots of her text conversation with Allison on the night of the killing. In messages sent at around 10:21 p.m. on April 17, 2024, just 1 hour before Allison was brought to the hospital, Allison wrote that she was afraid of the man beside her. She said he was losing control and refusing to admit his wrongdoing, then tearfully wrote that she did not know what to do and that this man might harm her. Reading those messages, investigators could not help but feel a chill. Allison seemed to have sensed that death was drawing very near. Her family said they had urged Allison to call the police as soon as they learned about the messages, but the situation was likely so urgent that she had no chance to seek more help. Allison even sent a desperate text saying that Hoey had fired several shots past her head as a threat. This matched what police found inside the vehicle, multiple shell casings, proving that more than one shot had been fired. The combination of physical evidence and the victim's messages created a clear picture. Allison Laporta did not take her own life. She was threatened at gunpoint by her boyfriend and then killed inside the vehicle. In parallel, the forensic autopsy findings on Allison's body further reinforced the direction of the police investigation. The medical examiner concluded that the bullet traveled at an angle from left to right and slightly from above downward. The projectile's path through the chest indicated that the victim was most likely shot from the driver's side, where Hoey was seated. If Allison had shot herself, the angle would have been completely different, typically straight in from the front or upward from beneath the chin, and there would usually be gunpowder burn marks around the wound in a close-range self-inflicted shot. But there were no such marks on the victim's skin, indicating the gun was fired from a distance beyond Allison's reach. Another crucial detail was found on the driver's seatbelt. Technicians observed an imprint shaped like the body of a handgun. It appeared that when the shot was fired, Hoey had braced the gun against the seatbelt that was fastened across his body, leaving a clear impression. This mark became powerful visual evidence, showing that the firearm was on the driver's side at the moment the trigger was pulled, completely ruling out the possibility that Allison shot herself. Faced with this wave of evidence, Hoey Nguyen was formally arrested and charged on April 18, 2024 with 2 offenses: second-degree murder and use of a firearm in the commission of a felony. He was held without bond at the Fairfax County Adult Detention Center. From that point forward, the investigation moved into the phase of strengthening the case for trial. Investigators continued interviewing witnesses. They went to Revolution Darts and Billiards, the pool hall where Hoey and Allison had spent time on that fateful evening. There, police learned that before leaving the venue, Hoey and Allison had gotten into a heated argument. Some friends who were with them, as well as patrons at a nearby table, recalled that Hoey had been drinking and appeared extremely angry. Hoey even reportedly growled that the only way for the argument to end was with a bullet, leaving those around them stunned. Even so, many people initially assumed it was just something said in the heat of the moment, but what happened afterward turned that horrific threat into reality. Statements from witnesses at the pool hall became a crucial piece of the puzzle, helping establish a motive. They showed that Hoey's anger toward Allison had escalated to the point where he was willing to threaten her life in front of others. At the same time, investigators also examined the victim's mental health history. Medical records showed that in 2022, Allison went through a period of psychological crisis and was hospitalized for treatment. The diagnostic record stated that she had schizoaffective disorder, a condition combining symptoms of schizophrenia and a mood disorder, and that she had experienced thoughts of ending her life during that time. Hoy's attorney immediately planned to use this detail to support a narrative that Allison died by suicide in the vehicle. But the prosecution team had already prepared evidence to counter that argument. They brought in independent mental health experts to analyze the case, and the experts stated that although Allison had previously struggled psychologically, she had stabilized, was working normally, and was full of life and deeply devoted to her child. Allison's family also completely rejected any possibility that she took her own life. Her father said that his daughter loved life, loved her child, and always wanted to be with the people she cared about. There was no reason for her to take her own life. By gathering comprehensive physical evidence, witness statements, and psychological context, investigators and prosecutors gradually built a solid case file. The picture became clear. Nguyen was an abusive partner who was willing to threaten his girlfriend with a gun and then, in a fit of rage, take her life. After everything, he constructed a fabricated story in an attempt to escape responsibility. Throughout an investigation that lasted more than 1 year, Nguyen consistently refused to admit wrongdoing. He remained silent after his arrest and maintained all contact with the outside world through his attorney. Even so, his lies were thoroughly documented. Prosecutors calculated that Hai changed his statements and invented different details more than 400 times during the investigation. This figure highlighted the defendant's dishonesty and became a focal point once the case entered public trial proceedings. Notably, before this incident occurred, Allison and Nguyen were once considered an ideal couple. Allison Kate Laporta, born on July 11, 1985, was an Italian-American woman. She grew up in a working-class family in the states of Maryland and Virginia. Her father was Timothy Poundsbury, and her mother was Margaret Laporta. Allison was loved by those around her for her outgoing and affectionate personality. Close friends often called her by the affectionate name Kate. After graduating from high school, Allison married and had 2 children, a daughter named Caitlin Lasky and a son named Connor Garvey. However, the early marriage did not last, and Allison became a single mother raising her 2 children. Despite the hardships, Allison remained resilient and always kept an optimistic spirit. She saw her children as her reason for living. Her family said she often took them to the beach near the family vacation home in Bethany, Delaware. At work, Allison was diligent and responsible. She worked at the Safeway supermarket in the Fort Hunt area of Alexandria, Virginia for more than 6 years, starting as a cashier and gradually being promoted into a management role. Her coworkers appreciated her dedication and her drive to keep learning. Outside of work, she also enjoyed spending time with friends. Allison treated friends like family. She could easily strike up a conversation with anyone and was always willing to help, so she was surrounded by many good friends. Within her extended family, Allison was a devoted daughter. She frequently called and texted her parents, grandparents, and relatives just to spontaneously say, "I love you," then burst into a soft giggle. In the obituary, the family wrote that Kate was a beautiful soul, and that her passing was an immeasurable loss to everyone. Before the tragedy happened, Allison Laporta's life seemed to have turned to a brighter new chapter. After the ups and downs of her youth, she had a stable job, 2 healthy children, and most importantly, a new romantic relationship with Nguyen. Allison met Hai about 1 year before the case and was quickly drawn to the maturity and life experience of a man 9 years older than her. Friends said Allison used to call Hai my other half, a loving way of saying her soulmate. She hoped to build a happy family with him and even adopted a small kitten to bring joy into their home together. On the surface, Nguyen appeared to be a considerate boyfriend. He even taught Allison how to assemble and use a gun as a new hobby. Allison excitedly told her family that she enjoyed learning those skills. No one among Allison's family and friends thought anything was wrong in that relationship. It was only when the fateful night arrived that the heartbreaking truth, Allison had been abused and threatened, began to come to light, leaving her loved ones stunned and filled with regret for not recognizing the danger signs sooner. As for Nguyen, he was a Vietnamese American man born or raised in the United States. His family is currently settled in Northern Virginia, an area with a large Vietnamese community. Hoy lived in Lorton, Virginia, in a residential neighborhood not far from Allison's home. In the eyes of neighbors and acquaintances, Hoy spoke English fluently and appeared well integrated into American life. He also had a passion for firearms and enjoyed learning about different types of weapons. While dating Allison, Hoy shared this interest with her, never imagining that it would also be what led her to an irreversible tragedy. Nearly 1.5 years after the homicide, the case of Hu Nguyen and Allison Laporta went to public trial at the Fairfax County Circuit Court. The trial began in mid-September 2025 amid intense public attention. Hu Nguyen was prosecuted for second-degree murder, a charge for intentional killing without premeditation, along with use of a firearm in the commission of a felony. If convicted, he could face a maximum sentence of 40 years in prison for the murder charge and 3 years in prison for the firearm charge. In court, Nguyen appeared gaunt after a long period of detention. He sat at the defense table, silently watching the jury selection process and the opening procedures. As for the defense attorneys, their only strategy was to blame the victim. In their opening statement, the defense said Allison Laporta's death was a tragedy, but not a murder, claiming it was a desperate act by the victim herself. They argued that Allison died by suicide because she had a history of mental illness and had been hospitalized in 2022 for a severe psychological disorder. Therefore, on that fateful night, she allegedly lost control and shot herself. They also argued that there was no sign that Hu personally pulled the trigger and that no witness saw him fire a gun, so he could not be convicted based on speculation alone. However, the prosecution had fully prepared evidence to refute every argument from the defense. The lead prosecutor, Steve Descano, opened by showing the court chilling crime scene images. They included photos from inside the SUV, with Allison's blood across the seats and floor, shell casings scattered throughout, and a close-up photo of the driver's seatbelt bearing an imprint from the handgun. From there, Descano argued that all physical evidence pointed to one clear story. Nguyen was seated in the driver's seat and pulled the trigger, firing across toward the passenger seat where Allison was sitting. He also pointed to the seatbelt photo and emphasized that only someone holding the gun from the driver's side could have created that imprint, not Allison. Next, the prosecution called witnesses one by one. First were the people who had been at the pool hall that night. One friend testified that they personally heard Hu threaten Allison, saying that only a bullet could end the argument, and that he even declared he would shoot Allison right there in front of everyone. The testimony sent a shiver through the courtroom. Some jurors stared at the defendant with furious expressions. Next, the victim's close cousin, Jessica Harris, was called to testify. She took a deep breath and recounted the final messages Allison had sent her. The text showed that Allison was terrified Hu would harm her. Jessica even choked up as she said the family had urged Allison to call the police that night, but there was no time, and that Allison loved life, loved her child, and would never have chosen to leave this world that way. A forensic doctor from the Fairfax Police Department was also brought in to present an analysis of the bullet trajectory. The expert explained that the bullet entered the victim's chest from left to right and at a downward angle. If the victim had shot herself, the bullet's path would have been entirely different. In addition, there was no gunshot residue on the victim's hands, meaning Allison had not handled a firearm. By contrast, Hu's hands showed gunpowder residue. The prosecution also presented photos of 4 shell casings found on the driver's side floor, 1 casing in Allison's purse and 1 casing in the rear area. They asked, if Allison fired a single shot at herself, why were there 4 casings at the driver's seat? This showed that at least 4 shots were fired from the driver's position, matching Allison's message that Hu had fired multiple shots to threaten her before ultimately killing her. The most emotional moment came when Timothy Poundsbury, the victim's father, was invited to speak. He stepped forward, looked directly at the defendant, and said in a low, sorrowful voice that no sentence could heal this loss. He said Hu might go to prison and someday be released, but he had lost his daughter forever. After about 1 week of trial, the proceedings moved into closing arguments. Defense attorneys tried to persuade the jury to consider manslaughter instead of murder, arguing that Allison might have accidentally pulled the trigger during a struggle with Hu. But the prosecution pushed back fiercely. They pointed out that the defendant had lied non-stop, changing his story hundreds of times. If he were innocent, why lie so much? Hu also staged the scene and disposed of the gun, clear behavior of a guilty man. The jury did not deliberate for long. On September 22, 2025, the court found Hu Max Nguyen guilty of second-degree murder and use of a firearm in the commission of a felony. Upon hearing the verdict, Hu Nguyen lowered his head and showed no reaction. Perhaps he had anticipated the outcome, as the evidence presented was overwhelmingly convincing. His sentence will be delivered at a subsequent hearing scheduled to take place in February 2026. In the worst-case scenario, Huy Nguyen could face a total of 43 years in prison, effectively a life sentence for this 48-year-old man. After the trial, Steve Descano stated that Allison should still be here with everyone today. But Huy's ruthless actions stole a daughter from her parents and stole a mother from her children. He also expressed relief that the defendant's lies ultimately did not help him escape accountability. In particular, everyone fell silent when Allison's daughter, Caitlin Lasky, tearfully told the press that no matter what the court decided, her mother would not be coming back. The murder of Allison Kate Laporta is a powerful wake-up call about violence in intimate relationships. It drew media attention from local to national outlets. Even People magazine covered the trial, underscoring how shocking the case was. The public expressed deep mourning for a gentle young mother, while also feeling outrage at the defendant's cruelty and evasiveness. Many people asked, how can tragedies like this be prevented? Indeed, the case raises painful questions because it shows how domestic violence can be carefully hidden. Allison's life appeared outwardly happy, yet in just one night, she became the victim of the very person she trusted. There were no clear early warning signs for her family, other than the fact that Huy seemed somewhat jealous. The lesson is that we need to be more alert to even the smallest signs. If Allison's loved ones, and Allison herself, had recognized how dangerous Huy was earlier, perhaps she could have found a way to prevent the tragedy in her life. On Thursday, April 18th, 2002, an elderly couple returned home from an overseas business trip and discovered that their daughter, Stephanie Van Nguyen, and their two grandchildren, Christina, 4 years old, and John, 3 years old, were gone. Searching around the house in Delhi Township, Ohio, they were shocked to find a thick envelope stuffed with cash and jewelry, along with a letter written by their daughter. In the letter, Stephanie said her failed marriage had driven her to the edge. She wrote that she would take her two children and drive the car to the bottom of the Ohio River near the Grand Victoria Casino, leaving the money and jewelry behind so relatives could handle funeral arrangements for the three of them. The family immediately rushed to report what they found to the Delhi Township Police. In a panic, they prayed the letter wasn't true while urgently pleading for authorities to act at once. The search for the missing mother and children began that same night, from April 18th into the early hours of April 19th, 2002. According to the letter, Stephanie planned to drive into the river near the Grand Victoria Casino in Rising Sun, Indiana. It was a wide, deep stretch of river marking the boundary between Ohio and Indiana. Delhi Township Police therefore contacted authorities on the Indiana side, including the Dearborn County Sheriff's Department and the Indiana Department of Natural Resources, to coordinate an underwater search. All night long, searchlights and motorboats swept the river near the Grand Victoria dock in the early spring cold. Investigators on shore combed the riverbank for skid marks or vehicle debris, but found nothing. The water was black as ink, and the riverbed, layered with thick mud, seemed to swallow every secret hole. Despite their best efforts, the initial search yielded no results. There was no trace of Stephanie or her two children. Standing by the vast river at dawn, rescue workers could only shake their heads in dismay. Where were the Vietnamese American mother and her two children now? In the minds of Stephanie's loved ones, one question flashed like a warning. Did someone interfere? Had an enemy harmed Stephanie's entire family and staged the scene with a suicide note? Or had Stephanie, in a breakdown, written the letter and then fled somewhere with her children without actually driving into the river? Anxiety hung over Delhi Township in the days that followed, and investigators remained deeply unsettled. If the three really were in the river, why had the search turned up nothing? A car that large, could it truly vanish without a trace? So they continued gathering every clue and trace that might reveal the movements of the mother and two children before they disappeared. Checking Stephanie's bank and credit accounts, police confirmed that she had withdrawn a large sum of money shortly before she went missing. The cash and jewelry were still there, and there were no signs of a struggle at the home, so robbery was ruled out almost immediately. Her call history in the days leading up to the disappearance also showed no unusual contacts. Police then interviewed Stephanie's friends and relatives to better understand her past and her relationships. From there, police learned that Stephanie, Thay Van Nguyen, 26 years old, was a petite but strong-willed Vietnamese American woman. She had immigrated to the United States with her family as a teenager and worked as a card dealer at the Argosy Casino. Friends remembered her as a devoted mother who often proudly talked to coworkers about Christina Nguyen, 4 years old, and John Tai Nguyen, 3 years old. The two children were bright and adorable, with a charming mix shaped by Vietnamese heritage and life in America. To the small Vietnamese community in Cincinnati, Stephanie and her children represented a young, modern family that had blended well into American society. Yet behind that image, Stephanie was trapped in an unhappy marriage that was on the verge of collapse. As marital conflicts grew worse, she became emotionally overwhelmed and may have fallen into depression. When she decided to divorce, she also did not want her husband to have custody of the children. A close friend said Stephanie had repeatedly confided that she felt cornered by her circumstances, lonely and hopeless in a foreign land, even though her parents lived nearby. She had even expressed suicidal thoughts in the period shortly before the incident. Upon learning this, police immediately summoned Stephanie's husband, said to be the last person with the mother and children, for questioning. During the interview, he insisted in anguish that he had no idea his wife was planning anything so horrific. He admitted that their relationship had recently been troubled, but he firmly denied ever abusing or threatening her. He then handed over a separate letter Stephanie had written specifically to him, with content similar to the one left for her parents. Moreover, he had a solid alibi. In the end, he was ruled out as a suspect. To be certain, police also sent all of Stephanie's letters for handwriting analysis. The results later matched her handwriting and signature in official records, ruling out the possibility that the notes were forged or written under coercion. In parallel, other witnesses were contacted one by one. Stephanie's friends and coworkers at the casino said she had shown signs of depression toward the end and had once blurted out, "Only lying down can set me free." This matched what her family had shared, that Stephanie had wanted to end her life before the incident happened. One particularly important witness then came forward, a police officer in Indiana. He reported a chance encounter with Stephanie in the early hours of April 19, 2002. That officer had pulled over a young woman for failing to dim her high beams for oncoming traffic. The report stated that it was Stephanie's green 1997 Nissan Pathfinder with Ohio plate ADH 7739. The officer also clearly remembered two children asleep in the back seat, consistent with Christina and John. The woman appeared nervous, her face drawn and anxious, but since she had proper identification, the officer only issued a warning and let her go. The stop occurred near a river access dock in Aurora, Indiana, a town not far from the Grand Victoria Casino. Hearing this, investigators felt both relief and dread. Relief because they now had the last confirmed sighting of the three alive, and dread because it placed them right on the bank of the Ohio River in the pre-dawn hours of April 19th. Even so, the late statement was extremely valuable. It helped police narrow down the exact stretch of river that needed to be searched. Divers were deployed again around the dock at Lesko Park in Aurora, where the Pathfinder had last been seen. But once again, the effort came up empty-handed. The murky water seemed to have hidden the vehicle too well. Delhi Township Police ultimately leaned heavily toward the theory that Stephanie had driven into the river, ending her own life along with her two children. A criminal profiler assessed that it resembled a family murder-suicide pattern, in which a mother, due to depression or resentment toward her husband, kills the children and then takes her own life. What was especially striking in Stephanie's case was that she had even arranged for funeral expenses, an indicator of long-term planning commonly seen in premeditated self-destruction. But even if investigators leaned toward that possibility, their job remained the same: find what was left of the mother and children. And the key to that challenge was locating Stephanie's Nissan Pathfinder, because if the car was found, they would know for certain whether the three were inside. However, search technology in 2002 was still extremely limited. Police used underwater detection equipment, but the resolution was low and the scan range was narrow. The Hamilton County Fire Department dive team also made multiple dives around the Aurora dock area, but found nothing. The U.S. Coast Guard, which oversees the Ohio River, assisted by checking downstream dam stations in case bodies or debris had drifted away, but they also found nothing. A frightening possibility emerged. The vehicle may have sunk into a deep whirlpool depression in the riverbed or drifted several kilometers before becoming trapped in mud. If so, finding it with 2002 technology was almost like searching for a needle at the bottom of the sea. After months of searching without results, the case gradually went cold. By the end of 2002, The disappearance of Stephanie Van Nguyen and her 2 children was officially classified as a mysterious missing persons case. Police had no choice but to pause the investigation and file it away as a cold case, pending new leads. For many years afterward, the disappearance of the Vietnamese mother and her 2 children remained a lingering ache for local law enforcement. The file was placed into storage, but it would be pulled out from time to time whenever a new investigator took over. Stephanie's family, especially her parents, never lost hope. They regularly contacted police for updates, pleading with authorities not to give up. In the community, the story slowly turned into local legend, with some believing Stephanie might not have died at all, that she had taken her children and fled far away, because no one had actually seen them go under the river. Other baseless rumors also surfaced. Someone would claim to have spotted an Asian woman with 2 children wandering in another state. Police checked, but none of those reports matched the Nguyen family. Websites like Missing Kids and NamUs continued to post the case from time to time, even sharing age progression images of Christina and John as they might look when older, holding onto the hope that the family could still be out there somewhere. Still, no lead ever proved stronger than the original farewell letter. Delhi Township Police never stopped thinking about it. Nearly 20 years had passed, yet the question, are they really at the bottom of the river, still had no answer. In the years that followed, underwater search technology advanced dramatically. New generation detection equipment with higher resolution and wider coverage made it far easier to locate metal objects on riverbeds and lake bottoms. So in 2021, the police department decided to reopen Stephanie Van Nguyen's case, hoping that modern technology could finally uncover the truth. Officer Heather Taylor was the one who passionately pushed for the case to be reopened. After leadership approved, a special task team was formed in early 2021, including Lieutenant Macaluso, an experienced officer from the original 2002 search, and newly invited sonar search specialists. A police official said they were approaching the 20th anniversary of the Nguyen family's disappearance, and they wanted to bring the case to a close for the family. This time, Delhi Township Police partnered with the Hamilton County Police Association, HCPA, and the Indiana Department of Natural Resources to deploy side-scan sonar equipment along the Ohio River. This device could send out sound waves and capture cross-sectional images of the riverbed, helping distinguish solid objects from mud and sand. Starting in April 2021, the search team persistently scanned with sonar for 6 straight months along a stretch of river spanning dozens of kilometers from near the Grand Victoria Casino dock downriver toward Aurora. To be even more thorough, they mapped the riverbed and divided it into grids, then piloted a boat equipped with the scanner across each grid, refusing to miss a single square meter. In late September 2021, promising signals finally appeared. The screen began showing 3 unusual objects on the riverbed. Each was roughly the size of a passenger car, lying at a depth of about 15 meters and around 90 meters from shore. Police marked the coordinates, labeling them 3 special targets. Macaluso's instincts told him that one of the 3 would be the pathfinder they had been searching for all these years. On the night of October 13th into the early hours of October 14th, a major recovery operation took place at the Lesko Park boat ramp. A dive team was deployed along with a crane and specialized equipment. As darkness fell, seasoned divers slipped into the icy water, following the GPS signal toward the target. With practiced precision, the dive team threaded a steel cable through the vehicle's frame and signaled the crane to lift. Inch by inch, the car that had been submerged for nearly 20 years began to surface. When the first tire broke the surface, everyone held their breath. Patchy green paint gradually came into view, matching the color of a 1997 Nissan Pathfinder. At last, the SUV rose out of the river, drawing choked sighs of relief from the search team. The license plate was heavily corroded, but the number on the frame was still readable, confirming it was Stephanie Van Nguyen's vehicle. In that moment, the officers at the scene got goosebumps. After 19 years, what they had feared from the farewell letter had become reality. All eyes fixed on the car doors. Were the victims' remains inside? The vehicle was then placed on the ground along the riverbank near Aurora. Its condition showed severe damage from decades underwater, the windows were shattered or missing, the interior was rotted, and mud filled the cabin. This made it extremely difficult for biological evidence to survive. The scene was processed with strict protocol. Police erected a tent around the vehicle and waited for daylight to begin an on-site examination. On the morning of October 14th, 2021, forensic anthropologists from the University of Indianapolis arrived to help investigators examine every corner of the interior. Using small shovels, they removed layers of mud and carefully sifted through the material, hoping to find bones. But nearly everything had completely decomposed over time. They found only a small bone fragment believed to be human, discovered beneath the rear seat area. The piece was a few centimeters long and dark brown. At first, it was suspected to be part of a leg bone. Beyond that, the forensic team found no other bone fragments or teeth inside the vehicle. Even so, that was enough to open the door to the truth. The fragment was carefully sealed and rushed to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation lab for DNA testing. Because the sample was extremely old and heavily degraded, technicians chose mitochondrial DNA sequencing. Stephanie's family also provided DNA samples for comparison. After nearly 3 months of analysis, in early January 2022, the results concluded that the DNA from the bone fragment matched Stephanie Van Nguyen. On January 7, 2022, the Dearborn County, Indiana Prosecutor's Office received official confirmation that the remains recovered were Stephanie's. With the mother identified, the next question was, where were the 2 children, Christina and John? Heartbreakingly, there was no sign of the children's remains inside the vehicle. Investigators proposed that because the bodies were smaller, the river current may have swept them out through the broken windows and carried them elsewhere. Another possibility was that their remains were scattered in the riverbed mud, awaiting discovery in a future search. Police decided to continue treating Christina and John's case as an active missing persons investigation. And although Christina and John still could not be found, confirming the mother's remains resolved much of the decades-old mystery. The case was officially determined to be a murder-suicide. Stephanie Van Nguyen was both a victim and the perpetrator who deliberately ended her own life and the lives of her 2 children. With this conclusion, nearly 20 years after the file was first opened, Delhi Township Police were finally able to close the case. Criminology experts assessed that Stephanie fit the profile of a revenge mother. Driven by resentment toward her husband, she chose to take her children's lives, knowing it would be the most devastating punishment for the person left behind. More tragically, in her despair, Stephanie may have believed that by going into the river together, she could keep her children with her forever, beyond anyone's reach. This aligns with what was known about her past. Stephanie had never committed a crime and had shown no violent behavior. She loved her children and cared for them attentively. Therefore, Stephanie's motive for killing her children did not stem from hatred toward them. It was largely the result of a mental breakdown. She wanted to take them with her because she did not want them to become a burden to others, and she also wanted to punish her husband. This psychological pattern has appeared in a number of cases worldwide in which a mother kills her children and then takes her own life. Moreover, Stephanie Van Nguyen was described as quiet and reserved, someone who rarely shared her inner struggles with others. She did not seek therapy or any form of help before the crime, perhaps influenced by an Asian cultural mindset that feels ashamed or fears judgment when speaking about depression. In addition, warning signs, such as her remark about wanting to lie down and be free, were not taken seriously enough by her family. All of this contributed to the growth of a demon of despair inside Stephanie, pushing her to act alone. On that fateful day, she made a cold decision and arranged everything, setting aside money, writing farewell letters and instructions for funeral arrangements, and even calculating in detail how all 3 would die together. From that moment on, Stephanie Van Nguyen was no longer an ordinary mother. She became the perpetrator in the tragedy of her own life. As for Stephanie's family, they went through the legal process to have the court declare the 2 children deceased in absentia so relatives could handle funeral matters and related legal issues. In January 2022, a small memorial was held along the Ohio River in Aurora, where the vehicle was found. Attendees placed flowers and stuffed animals in memory of the innocent Christina and John. Representatives from the police and local authorities were also present, offering apologies that they could not bring the children home safely. The atmosphere fell silent as the names of the 3 members of the Nguyen family were spoken in the final prayer. Stephanie Van Nguyen's case ended with many mixed emotions. First, it brought a measure of truth and closure to the family after 2 decades of exhausting waiting. Even so, the unanswered fate of the 2 children continues to haunt those left behind. People shudder at the realization that in a brief moment of collapse, a mother destroyed the bright future of 2 innocent children. 3 lives lost beneath the river are a painful reminder of how vital care, attention, and family support truly are. At the same time, it is also proof of the power of forensic science. No matter how deeply the truth is buried under the dust of time, justice will eventually come to light, thanks to people who refuse to give up. What do you think about today's tragic story? Do you feel Stephanie Van Nguyen is more pitiable or more blameworthy? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you found today's content compelling, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Vietnamese Case Files so you can keep following more gripping stories in the future. Goodbye, and see you next time.